Hi, Linda. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Well, we've been excited about getting you on, and it's kind of historical. I don't know how many engineers there were at WED when you started. How big was that women's bathroom in the engineering department?
I'm not sure if there were any female engineers when I first started at WED,
Wow.
but I can't say that for sure. But definitely I was the first electronic.
So we're talking hidden figures kind of stuff here. This is epic.
A little bit,
Pretty historical,
yes, I can
yeah.
relate to that.
Well, we'll get back to that. I wanted to rewind the clock and just hear a little bit more about just kind of where you come from and the context.
Well, what's the phrase? It's a long, strange trip that we've been on.
Yeah.
I ended up in high school in Hancock Park. In
Ritzy,
private girls' high school, Marlboro School for Girls. And so as a result, I was handed my high school diploma by Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
Which was an honor, but it was literally in a rose garden behind ivy-covered walls.
And how big, I got to ask how big your graduating class
It
was.
was less than 65.
Mine was 1,200. So that's pretty intimate. That's great.
It was pretty tight.
You had some notable classmates during some of your time there?
Yes, I didn't end up actually graduating from Marlboro, but one of Disney's granddaughters sat behind me in algebra
Wow.
class.
If you don't know Hancock Park, I mean, it's where the mayor lives. It's a pretty nice
It's a
little
lovely
hood. It's one of the only neighborhoods my wife would ever want to live in if we reach the orange curtain. But congratulations. That's a pretty neat place to put down some roots.
It was a wonderful education, but it didn't really prepare me for being on a construction site with 3,000 guys 8 years later.
Little contrast, right?
A little bit of a contrast.
Was UCLA a little bit of a transition?
It was
point
more
into that?
transitional, yeah.
Okay.
But still, I was usually the only woman in my
Wow.
classes, to the point where I would notice if there was another woman.
Talking
in the
about
class.
contrasting scees.
Yeah.
65 girls in a rose garden.
Yep.
Wow. Now, UCLA, what was it that sparked the interest in studying engineering at all? Because that wasn't necessarily conventional.
Well, I ended up there pretty much completely by accident. I wish I could say that I had a plan, but I didn't. And so in those days, you filled out your college applications with manual typewriters. It was a long, long time ago.
Don't tell me this was a typo.
It was more of a dart.
Okay. It's like,
And so I was doing all of these applications, and when I got to the one for UCLA, there was this question about what do you think you might want to do, and I, sure, engineering. Why not? My father's an engineer, and I didn't realize that was going to land me in the School of Engineering with very advanced courses in physics and math, and
lots of math.
Chemistry.
So much math.
so much calculus. Yeah. So it kind of changed my life, that one click, but.
Wow. Well, at what age did you even hear the word Imagineer or Imagineering or knew that this was a thing?
I think it was like infancy because of
Really?
The wonderful world of color.
Uncle Walt,
Maybe you
Sunday
don't know
night.
that.
Sunday, I do, yeah.
And so I knew about Imagineers, and I
Okay.
always wanted to be one. And we lived in Los Angeles.
We've seen Dorothy Redmond, Mary Blair, all the.
So I was lucky enough to be able to go to Disneyland a lot, and I just
Nice.
thought the product was amazing.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I
being
never wanted
from
to do
California.
anything else.
Wow. Okay. So you really got hooked on the earring part of Imagineering being a thing. That's amazing. So out of UCLA, what was the journey to Imagineering? Was it a long and rocky road or
It was.
direct express?
It was a good timing, because by the time I graduated from UCLA, they were just starting to hire for the TDL and Epcot projects.
Tokyo Disneyland,
Yes.
Epcot,
Yes.
back-to-back epic projects.
And so there were advertisements in the newspaper, which is the way you did it back then. There wasn't any internet or anything like that. And so I saw that, and I was on a mission. So I sent in my resume, which is basically non-existent because I'd gone straight through college, which is, again, not a good thing to do, but I did. And I didn't hear, and I didn't hear, and I didn't hear. And I called them every week and didn't hear. And finally, they admitted they'd lost it, which is probably a polite way of saying that they filed it. But so I said, okay, I'll I'll bring you another one. So I drove to Glendale, and I got as far as the reception desk, and I gave them my resume.
I wish my kids would have that kind of initiative. That's great.
Well, I think I still wasn't any more qualified, but I think they just felt guilty, and so they gave me an interview. And I remember that the gentleman who interviewed me was like my father's age, and there was this table in front of me, and it was a metal table, and I'm shaking. I'm so nervous. And so to hide it, I put my hands on this metal table and just like that, planted them down, went through the interview, thought I was doing pretty good. He was very kind to me. And then the interview was over, stood up, and you could see those handprints on the table, the
Wow.
sweaty palms.
Condensation.
Yep.
That's great.
And I think he saw those too, and just out of pity, they gave me an offer.
Well, I'm sure they saw something beyond compassion. That's wonderful. Well, awesome. Well, so when you started at then known WED Enterprises, I think before the rebranding to Walt Disney Imagineering, what was it was pretty, not quite the scale and size that it became towards the end of the life of the project, right?
No, because they were pretty much in the mode of doing 1 or 2 attractions at a time. And at that point, they only had...
Not 1 or 2 epic mega parks at a time.
No, they only had 2 parks at that time.
Yeah.
So they had the Magic Kingdom here in Florida.
I didn't think about that. They're operating 2 and they're designing 2.
Yeah, so
Wow.
so trying to scale up was something.
Simultaneously.
So I can't tell you the exact number, but it was approximately, I think, when I joined, 500 folks total at WED.
And probably it's quadrupled to several thousand.
Yeah, I think I can't tell you how the biggest it ever got, but I think it was
Wow.
slightly north of 2,000.
Well, I mean, so I imagine you saw some pretty extreme cultural shifts from the day you walked in the door to kind of peak critical mass Epcot opening.
Well, yeah, walking in as the first woman engineer, none of us knew how to deal with that situation. The guys didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. So at the beginning, I was kind of like more of a mascot, but that's okay. I deliberately never learned to type. To this day, I can't type. And the reason for that was that I would have been cast in a secretarial position, not out of cruelty, but just that's the way.
Stereotype.
It was a different
Yeah,
world. And so since I couldn't do that, they had to give me the beginnings of technical work. And it's
Wow, the typewriter really is important to this story.
I never thought
the
of it.
lack thereof of typing skills. Good strategic move there, not learning typing. Wow, and so tell me about some of your first assignments and how that grew to some of the big tasks pre Epcot opening.
I worked on some control systems for like PA control, for example, which is basically relay logic. That's how long ago this was.
Wow.
In the very, very beginning. And then a few months later, they were starting to assign the Epcot attractions. And so I was assigned Canada and the World of Motion.
Wow, World of Motion, pretty intense.
World of Motion was definitely a learning experience. Lots of figures on that one. I think there were more figures in that show than there ever had been before.
Yeah, more than Pirates of the Caribbean.
More than Pirates of the Caribbean.
Wow, amazing. Could you mind just sharing, kind of, for those that have never even heard the term show control, what that means and what that is?
Well, show control is the art of getting a whole bunch of other systems to play together seamlessly and in perfect sync. And it's harder than it sounds. And show control engineering is fun in that you are basically the silent conductor for the building. And if you've done your job right, nobody ever knows you were there. So you're talking to like everybody else. You're talking to the film projection systems, and you're talking to the figures. We're talking to the lighting systems, the audio systems, the video systems, the fire department overrides, you name it, you're talking to it. And so you sort of, it's sort of like being the hub of a wagon wheel, if you will. You're into a little bit of everything. But the primary, the subset of all of that you design yourself is the figure control systems. and the show control and monitoring systems. So basically, if somebody goes in a theater and hits the start button, that's something that you put there.
Oh. So, I mean, in Imagineering parlance, a show can be anything from a room to an e-ticket ride.
It's basically everything that you see around the ride if you're in a vehicle of some sort. It can be a theater show where there's audio animatronic figures on the stage. It can be simply a film theater. The one thing that it is not, for the most part, is live theater. That's usually
Right, live.
completely different.
Yeah. Thanks for that rewinding, just for those of us. Well, you mentioned kind of the contrast between that pretty bucolic private school setting to being in the field with a bunch of construction workers and kind of basically war, right? Trying to get to the future, which we all know began October 1st, 1982, right? So in those months leading up to the beginning of the 21st century in 1982, what was that like?
Well, it was very different. You learn lessons like, for example, especially as a woman on a construction site, if you are walking and you're about to go around the corner and you hear water running around the corner, you just stop for a second.
Let the water run its course.
Let the water stop and count to 5, and then you're safe. And that's saved me many a time.
You don't need to wait for the zip, huh? Wow.
But it was a little nerve-wracking in that all these people were not used to seeing a woman on the site pretty much at all, and particularly in that capacity. And so the first time I would walk onto any job site, everybody would stop what they were doing, and they would just stare at you, not
like you're some alien,
not rudely, but it was like you were some exotic animal that was walking through.
What's going on?
And it took them some time to get used to me.
Wow.
But they were, by and large, they were really kind to me, and I knew to address them with respect and explain to them what I was trying to do, and that obviously I had never been on a construction site before. And I would explain it all to them, and ask them for their help to get there. And almost to a man, they would do it.
Wow.
Very, very
That's amazing.
nice to me.
Wow. Well, post-opening, you went from building Disney's permanent World's Fair to an actual World's Fair.
Yes, did Expo 86 up in Vancouver. And at that point in time, I had been laid off from WED, and so just a very few months later, I moved over to the Disney Studio, which was starting a business to provide presentation systems for lease. And they had 4 contracts to do systems for Vancouver Expo 86.
Wow, and Don Iwerks was over the studio then, right?
What a wonderful man, yes.
That's
he was in charge of-
Ub's son, right? Leslie's dad.
Yes.
This is where he fits in the legacy of Imagineering and Disney. That's pretty awesome.
And just such a gentleman, and always a kind word for everybody. He was just amazing to
Probably a little different personality than a lot of the construction workers in the field at that
a
time,
little
I
more
would imagine.
gentlemanly, yes.
So you mentioned you had to adjust your language, actually.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
You kind of gotten accustomed to the saltiness of the construction site.
Yes. So I had to rein it in a bit. Hopefully, I still have done so.
Well, for those who've never heard of the Spirit Lodge or at the Vancouver World Expo, do you mind just explaining that? Because that's a really great.
Spirit Lodge, I think, was probably the
Influential
most
attraction.
attraction up there. Bob Rogers did a stunning job on it, and it's just magic done well.
This is the predecessor to Mystery Lodge
It's
at Knox, right?
predecessor to Mystery
Yeah.
Lodge,
Oh.
And it was pretty easy to control, really. There wasn't that much to it. He had all sorts of stories about holograms, but it was, I think you had to stand in line for 3 hours in order to see
Wow.
it. but it was basically just an Indian telling a story, and as he progressed, there was a fire burning on the stage and with smoke, and gradually the smoke would form into images that backed up the story that he was telling. And at the end, he would hold up his hand, and a smoke eagle would land on his hand, and then he would flick it, and the eagle would vanish.
Well, when you say just, I think the only word I could think of is just magic. I mean, to bring that 18th century, magician's trick with the modern technology and materials, and the wonderful storytelling is really pretty wonderful. But so then on to Paris, right?
Then on to Paris. Sandwiched in my daughter in between all of that.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes. So she was kind of born in between the design phase of Euro Disney and the installation phase of Euro Disney.
It's funny how we put our chapters in our lives based on projects and geographies.
And when she was 6 months old, she and I and our nanny moved to the campground
Camp Davy Crockett.
Camp Davy Crockett.
Wow.
And
what an experience.
Yeah, that was one of the stupider things.
Okay. You should have held out for the Ritz Paris notes.
No, I shouldn't have brought her.
Yeah.
But,
what a challenge.
It just wasn't one of the smarter things that I did. So we all were there from September through December, came home right before Christmas. And she had gotten sick there. The weather was terrible. So I came back to finish the project, but I came back without her. She wasn't even a year old. So bad mom that I am, I had to fly back just in time to see her walk, and then I left.
Oh, that's some of the sacrifices that we make here. But so it's on Paris. Was that where you got to work on your favorite attraction of all time? It's a Small World?
Oh, yes. Yes, I designed the system for Small World, but I think we were talking about this a little earlier. And given the music that was in that building, I was motivated that my design was going to be perfect so that my technical assistant could go in there for me and that I would never, ever have to set foot in that building. And to a large extent, I was successful.
That is one unique motivation for quality control and quality assurance. I'm going to do a perfect job so I never have to come back. I love it. Well, I know some of your career has been shaped by kind of mirroring the project phases of building something new from scratch and then updating it and then going back in and completely replacing it. In terms of your work being based here in Orlando and being able to be the only kind of on the ground, boots on the ground show control engineer, and was that kind of a different kind of pace and in terms of being able to be physically here on the ground and kind of care for your babies in person?
Yeah, well, once I got back here from France, there was enough work here with 4 parks. Well, eventually there were 4 parks that I didn't ever have to leave. So I had a combination of things that I would do. I would support installations of new attractions. Sometimes they were things that somebody else had designed. Sometimes they were things that I had designed. And I would also participate in reconfiguring existing facilities or attractions. Sometimes it was a refresh of the attraction that was already there. And sometimes it was a completely new attraction just in an existing physical space. And then on top of that, as time went on, control systems age and become antiquated and harder to deal with. And so I gradually started replacing and upgrading equipment that I had put in when I was a kid.
Wow.
So then that's sort of how I finished my career.
Wow.
So yeah, the hours were still quite long, and I retired at 60, and part of that was that so much of the work demanded that you'd be doing it all night long, and you just don't bounce back when you're 60 the same way you do when you're 25. So.
Well, congratulations on being able to do that. 60, that's a nice goal. In terms of one of the questions that we always like to ask is, what some of your favorite attractions that you worked on? I mean, a lot of times it's hard to choose from your favorite kids or their attractions or experiences.
Well, I was blessed to be able to work on a lot of really big ones. But I have to say that the thing that I enjoyed the most was when I could work on a small one, because number one, it allowed me, normally was just in a technical wall, take on different walls, have more of an impact on how the attraction turned out. There's this one story that I always go back to, a very small attraction at the studio, probably the $3 or $4 million refresh in an area called Soundstage 4, which was just used for previewing films.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a Narnia promotion that was done in there.
Probably one of my favorite IPs of all time.
Yes.
I love it.
And so it was a very simple concept. So you would walk into the building and basically you were in basically a sound stage, but there were these doors, wardrobe doors, beautifully detailed, and lights on them, and then those doors would open after a brief introduction, and lo and behold, there was Narnia that you got to walk through the doors and see it. And so one morning, I came in, it had just opened, and I didn't realize that they'd already run a group of people through there. And I came in, and the room was by and large empty, but there was a family with 11, 12-year-old boy, and the cast member was with him, and the boy was right next to the doors that had closed after the previous group and was feeling the doors, and he just had the greatest smile on his face. And it turned out he's blind, and that was the way that he was experiencing the wardrobe doors. And so, in that moment, it just makes, that's why you do it. That's what you're really in it for.
Wow.
And it's a priceless moment.
Magic. Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing your time and your story.
My pleasure.
And congratulations, for paving the way and being such a trailblazer. Whether intentional or not, whether for a typo or not, we're going to have to get one of these typewriters at a museum one of these days, 'cause it's really influential.
It's called eBay.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Good to see you. Long time no see. Well, great to be with everyone, and glad to regroup. What an inspiring story. Wow. I just feel like we relived the whole experience all over, like we were in those trenches with you. How much time do you spend like reflecting back on kind of the olden days versus kind of the reality of life in the here and now? And do you even have time to stop and ponder kind of the moments?
Well, I kind of, I have to say I miss the people a lot. The work, as I was saying in the interview, was getting to be a little bit too demanding. In the old days, the old days, it was really a lot of fun because you didn't get penalized for much of anything. It's like the only thing that you could get penalized for was for not trying, and by trying and swinging at it, sometimes you'd fail, and that was okay. It was just kind of like the wild, wild west. And then as the years went by, it got a little bit more regulated, a lot more regulated and legislated. And so it was, I miss the good old days. Let me put it that way.
Do you still get back to the parks much? Are you an annual pass holder, or did you OD on the pixie dust and vow to never come back?
Well, I haven't been back a lot. Really kind of the pandemic killed it because they had to make it more regulated in order to get in. And so it got to the point where it's like, I kind of remember them the way they were when I left.
Wow. Yeah. And that David Green's with Visual Terrain was asking that he's counting 10 to 12 attractions at Epcot before 1982. He was just curious what was it like to be responsible and or to have your hands on so much at such a young age. I mean, just the scope and scale of that endeavor was so really unprecedented.
It, I was extraordinarily fortunate. I mean, these days, no one in their right mind would let somebody of my age have that kind of responsibility. But the gentleman that I mentioned in the interview, who was interviewing me for the job, sort of had a technique for selecting people. So he got kids that were right out of college because he knew that they could work hard and they didn't have to be paid a lot. And it worked. And we just didn't realize that we were, all of us, really too young to be doing this kind of a thing. So, if nobody tells you you can't, you do.
Now, when you started at WED Imagineering, I know it was on the cusp, or they were already in the growth mode. What was it like working? Was it kind of a beehive of activity, or was it already kind of a well-oiled machine that was kind of,
Well,
trying to be maintained?
I was in at the very beginning, and it was more like college, really, because we were all very young. I was 22 when I walked in the door. David Green, I think, was 20, maybe. I'm not even sure he was that old. So it was really kind of more almost of a college environment, but we just loved it, and we worked real hard, and we weren't being paid for it, but almost everybody would show up Saturday morning and work half a day just to stay on top of things. We were really, really jazzed, and we were convinced that we were doing just the most wonderful thing that was being built on the planet at that time.
Well, in that era, what was the most rewarding? Was it the first full night of sleep? Was it the ribbon cutting? Was it the cast member previews? Like, at what point were you able to take a breath and pat yourself on the back and take a breather?
Well, I do remember there were a few preview days at Epcot, if that's what you're asking about, the opening. There were a few days that we had let construction workers in, or some audiences. But then I remember the night before Epcot opened officially, all of us, we didn't even go to bed. We were running all over the park doing last minute tests. I actually found something doing that night that I never would have found in a million years had I not done that. But we all just got together and stood in a planter so that we could see the opening day ceremonies. And we were so tired, we were just kind of packed in, and that's the only reason we didn't fall over, I think. But
hold each other up.
Yeah, so I think I got to see the opening ceremonies, and then I think I finally went home and got a little bit of sleep.
Wow, I can't imagine. Well, it eventually then, Freddie was asking, at the point that you're managing half of all the show systems in the nation state of Walt Disney World, basically, what did that look like to manage a show system for so many incredible attractions?
I was quite fortunate. You're talking about later on as I was developing my department in Florida. I was very, very fortunate to have an extraordinary team of people, and working in the trenches, because I was like living in the parks, basically. I learned that it's not so much the college degree that counts, it's the practical experience. And so I recruited a wonderful technician, really, really bright guy, who was working at the Magic Kingdom at the time. And he was sort of my first helper, if you will. And all I had to do was convince him that he could do it. And then he just shot past me. And also he had a lot of associates that were in the maintenance organizations as well. So as we needed to augment our group, a lot of times we would go back and poach those individuals. So it was it was a joy to see all these people just take flight and be able to do these wonderful designs. Really, really terrific. And a
Very
lot
rewarding.
of times, for the most part, they were younger than I was. So I would give them the newer attractions so that there would be the memories and the knowledge of how to take those into the future. And then, as I said in the interview, I would go usually do the older stuff because I was going to be retiring anyway. So I would just kind of do a replacement and then move on.
They get to kind of watch all the new cute babies being born, and you're dealing with all the teenagers, rascally problem children. uh, Freddie Martin asked the question: when you're re-engineering a show system for a legacy attraction, what are the challenges of that technical update? Is there any kind of go-to standard problems, or is it really you just don't know what you're going to walk into?
I guess it's don't break it.
Don't make it worse.
It varies. A lot of times it wasn't all that difficult. There was, well, a lot of times though, there were situations where if you were going in and you were doing a refresh and it was supposed to be invisible, and people would tend to forget that it was completely new, really. It just looked like it was the same stuff. And so when something didn't work properly, well, how did you break it? It was like, well, I didn't actually, I replaced it.
Wow. Lisa Pasmonte Green asked, as such a trailblazer entering such a male-dominated world and male-dominated discipline, can you speak about how you found allies in your new role, and also how you handled any team members who made it clear that they might not want you in this role?
I was very fortunate. I really didn't have a lot of prejudice because of my gender. I think you always have to treat people with respect. And back in the day, the way you win people's respect in return is by just trying to be excellent. You can't whine and say that you should be kind to me because I happen to be female. That doesn't fly. You have to demonstrate that you can do the job just as well, if not better, than they.
Yeah. Someone's asking, in terms of that early Epcot crew or some of the senior kind of Imagineers, any original team members that worked with Walt or knew Walt that you got to work with, and any key learnings or takeaways that you caught or picked up from them?
There was quite a gap between when I started and when Walt had died. It was 10, 15 years, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, John Hench wasn't in the mud trenches with you, or Herbie Ryman. I imagine they were smoking cigars.
I was fortunate enough to be able to talk with them, but I wasn't in their league by a long shot, so we didn't really have a relationship. For the first few years, I would say, particularly over at the studio, there were still people that were wondering what Walt would have done. And it took really until Eisner came in that kind of disappeared. It was surreal if you would go over to the studio, because there was a conference room on one of the upper floors of the animation building, and it was a time capsule. It had been left exactly as it had been when Walt died, and that was sort of the attitude that was pervasive for a while. It was great in that Walt he really respected his people. So this is a stupid example, but like he said, well, everybody flies first class. There's no such a thing as being a vice president above flies first class. Everybody gets treated like that. So that was nice.
That would be really nice, especially if that was still the case. Tosh is asking, is there any special effects or sequence that you've always wanted to integrate into a show but just didn't quite have the chance? Any ones that got away?
I'm sorry, I'm sort of drawing a blank on that one.
Or
I
any
got to
that,
do so much.
yeah, I was just saying, so it's, I mean, so nothing that you would ever want to do that for budget or technical reasons, just had to leave it on the cutting room floor. You had to, you had a chance to really
Well,
execute your vision.
I wasn't really calling the shots from a creative standpoint. People would tell me what the script was going to be and what the effects that they wanted to have in they were going to do. So there wasn't in that sense anything that really got away.
Yeah. Well, based on when you're watching this, we were just collectively celebrating the 35th anniversary of a park that's near and dear to me, the Hollywood that never was but always will be, the Disney MGM Studios. And we've had a guest on Mr. Philip Vaughn, talk about the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular opening day attraction, or I think they were in rehearsals on opening day.
No, I think we got it open on
pretty much done.
Doesn't
I
matter.
think it gets credit as being there, and then still running, right? Still one of the anchors to that park. But talk about designing, testing that first show control system for a live stunt show, because that was kind of a first for Disney to do anything at that kind of scale of live action show control.
Yeah, there was a wonderful team that I was working with on that show. A gentleman named Chris Senchek came up with the architecture for that show. And we basically sort of created an architecture where both a human being and a computer would vote on every single effect that the stunt people were performing. And so I actually have it in my front hall. I have the original control board for that show, and it was full of dead man switches. And if the technician who was operating the show saw that a performer had tripped, for example, and it was like something that was going to happen, was going to injure him, all he had to do is take his hands off the board, and the effect wouldn't go. So it was a architecture, I believe, that was unique to that show, and I think it was copied in some ways for several years. It's more sophisticated now, but back then it was literally hardwired so that the control signal would go through your button, and then it would go to a computer, and then the computer would have the timing built into it, and then it would go and fire off a rolling ball or a punji stick, or you name it.
Wow. Fascinating. Someone's asking about can you talk more about the technical side and how systems become obsolete over time when they need to be updated? What's that process like? Or is there a standard time cycle? Or
the old stuff was built to last, but at a certain point, it wasn't terribly compact, and some of them used ancient computers that were no longer made. And so just like in the modern day world, you have PCs that really only last you for 5 years, and then you can't maintain them anymore, and you have to get new ones. So that's kind of the process that it goes through.
Well, I got to ask, just a last question, just my mind's boggled, everything that you were able to kind of accomplish and overcome and kind of deal with. But, talking again about that life balance, being a mom, a wife, you're Steve Alcorn, another legend of having a company, an entrepreneurial growing company, Global Needs. When it came time to move to Paris with a young family, how did you even weigh the cost benefits of those kind of decisions? Because it's not like you're just making a decision for yourself at that point, right?
Yeah, I think you have to remember this was a long time ago. This was like my daughter's she turned 33, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And at that time, as a woman in the industry, I still felt like I had something to prove. If I had bailed in the role that I was in at that time, that they would have been understanding, but that wouldn't necessarily have been cool. So it was sort of in kind of a selfish decision in a way, but up until that point in my career, I worked really hard to make women be accepted into the engineering workforce as equals. And if I pulled the mom card, that probably wasn't going to fly. So they were very nice to me in that when I went back alone to France, one of the vice presidents knew darn well that I had left an infant daughter back in Florida. And he basically gave me carte blanche to fly home anytime I wanted.
Wow.
So I didn't have to get any approvals. So about every 4 to 6 weeks, I would take a 4-day weekend and fly home to see them.
Well, I'm sure at this point, Danny's forgiven and forgotten if she ever remembered in the first place.
No, I don't think she did.
Well, thanks for just such an inspiring journey and sharing that with us and inspiring life. And if anyone wants to reach back out to you, because I just feel like you have so much to offer to so many, especially next generation that want to reach. Is there a best way to contact you or to reach back out to you?
I'm sure you can get me through email. So it's very simple. It's linda@alcorn.com.
Thank you so much for your generosity of time, your tale, and you're just an inspiration, Linda. And I think you made a comment about not being in the same league as the John Henches or some of those legends. You are a legend, and if Tia Master isn't a master of the craft isn't enough, I don't know what's going to convince you that. But just hats off to you, Linda. I'm so honored to get to spend time with you, and everyone on the line is just so excited to hear from you and to get your story. Thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thank you.